I started to pay very careful attention to what I was saying. I don't know if that happened voluntarily or involuntarily, but I could feel a sort of split developing in my psyche, and the split, and I've actually had students tell me the same thing that has happened to them after they've listened to some of the material that I've been describing to all of you. But I split into two, let's say, and one part was the, let's say, the old me that was talking a lot and that liked to argue and that liked ideas. And there was another part that was watching that part, like just with its eyes open and neutrally judging. And the part that was neutrally judging was watching the part that was talking and going, that isn't your idea. You don't really believe that. You don't really know what you're talking about. That isn't true. And I thought, that's really interesting. So now and that was happening to like 95% of what I was saying. And so then I didn't really know what to do. I thought, okay, this is strange. So maybe I've fragmented, and that's just not a good thing at all. I mean, it wasn't like I was hearing voices or anything like that. I mean, it wasn't like that. It was, well, people have multiple parts. So then I had this weird conundrum. It was like, well, which of these two things are me? Is it the part that's listening and saying, no, that's rubbish, that's a lie, you're doing that to impress people, you're just trying to win the argument, you know? Was that me, or was the part that was going about my normal verbal business me? And I didn't know, but I decided I would go with the critic. And then what I tried to do, what I learned to do, I think, was to stop saying things that made me weak. And now I mean, I'm still trying to do that, because I'm always feeling when I talk whether or not the words that I'm saying are either making me align or making me come apart. And I think the alignment, I really do think the alignment I think alignment is the right way of conceptualizing it, because I think if you say things that are as true as you can say them, let's say, then they come out of the depths inside of you. Because we don't know where thoughts come from. We don't know how far down into your substructure the thoughts emerge. We don't know what processes of physiological alignment are necessary for you to speak from the core of your being. We don't understand any of that. We don't even conceptualize that, but I believe that you can feel that. And I learned some of that from reading Carl Rogers, by the way, who's a great clinician, because he talked about mental health in part as a coherence between the spiritual or the abstract and the physical, that the two things were aligned. And there's a lot of idea of alignment in psychoanalytic and clinical thinking. But anyways, I decided that I would start practicing not saying things that would make me weak. And what happened was that I had to stop saying almost everything that I was saying. I would say 95% of it. It's a hell of a shock to wake up and I mean, this was over a few months, but it's a hell of a shock to wake up and realize that you're mostly dead wood. It's a shock, you know, and you might think, well, do you really want all of that to burn off? It's like, well, there's nothing left but a little husk, 5% of you. It's like, well, if that 5% is solid, then maybe that's exactly what you want to have happen. Well, so I told you that story as an elaboration of this line. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. It's a question worth asking. Just exactly what are your motives? Well, you know, maybe they're purer than mine were, and it's certainly possible. I don't think that I'm naturally a particularly good person. I think I have to work at it very, very hard. And I don't necessarily think that everyone is like that. But some people are worse than that. And everyone's like that to some degree. So it's worth thinking about. Just how much trouble are you trying to cause? You know, and the other thing you might think about is that if you're not doing something important with your life, by your own definition, because that's the game that we're playing, you get to define the terms, at least initially. Maybe you're prone to cause trouble just because you don't have anything better to do. Because at least trouble is more interesting than boring. You know, that's something you learn if you read Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky knew that extraordinarily well. And so if you're not doing something, if you're not pushing yourself to the limits of your capacity, then you have plenty of leftover, what would you say, willpower, energy, and resources to devote to causing interesting trouble. And so, also I would say this is also an archetypal scenario. God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That's something to meditate on. And it's not self-destructive, because what it is an attempt to, it's like the diagnosis of an illness. It's like if that does happen to be the case for you, or to some degree, maybe it's only 10% of you or something, or maybe it's 90%, well then coming to terms with that is excellent, because then maybe you can stop doing it. And what would be the downside to that? You'd have to give up your resentment, obviously, and your hatred and all of that, and that's really annoying, because those emotions are they're easy to engage in, and they're engaging, and they have this feeling of self-righteousness with them, and that goes along with them. But you're not doing this in order to put yourself down. You're doing this in order to separate the wheat from the chaff, and to leave everything that you don't have to be behind. What should move forward in time with me, and what should be let go as if it's dead wood? And the more dead wood that you let go of and burn off when you have the opportunity, the less it accretes around you. Here's something interesting about forest fires. You know, people have been trying to prevent forest fires for a long time, especially that damn bear, Smokey, right? He's trying to prevent forest fires. And so, because forest fires burn up the forest, and that can't be good. But here's what happens if you don't let forest fires burn, is that, well, forests collect a lot of dry branches, right? Because tree branches die, and wood falls on the forest floor and collects, and so the amount of flammable material keeps increasing with time. And that's not so bad if it's wet, but if the amount of flammable material is increasing and it gets really dry, and then it burns, then you have a real problem. The forest fire can burn so hot that it burns the topsoil right off, in which case you don't have a forest at all anymore, you just have a desert. And lots of trees are evolved to withstand forest fires of a certain intensity, and some won't even release their seeds unless there's been a fire. And so a little bit of fire at the right time can stop everything from burning to the ground. And that's also a really useful insight, a metaphorical insight into the nature of sacrifice, right? It's also a lot easier to let go of something when you're deciding to let go of it, because you've decided yourself that you're done with that. It's a weak part of you. It needs to disappear. You do that yourself, it's much better and much easier than it is if it's taken away from you forcibly, in which case you're very much likely to fight it. There's another interesting thing here, a motif that runs through the entire Bible. It's a very, very powerful motif. And it's partly associated with this idea of walking with or walking before God. And, you know, in the New Testament, Christ says something like, thy Father's will be done. And he means that will should be done through him. And so, I won't be able to state this exactly right, but it's something like this. You know, a lot of what people regard as their own personalities and are proud of about their own personalities aren't their own personalities at all. They're useless idiosyncrasies that differentiate them trivially from other people. But they have no value in and of themselves. They're more like quirks.